We have already encountered René Descartes, the philosopher, mathematician, gentleman soldier, and physicist, with his intense desire for absolute certainty and with his grandiose conception that he could build a rational and mathematical philosophy which no one could doubt, which no one could deny. So far, in his Meditations 1 and 2, we have seen that he has established only his own existence as a conscious being, as a thing that thinks, as a thinking thing. The formula was Cogito Ergo Sum. Every time I think, cogito, I exist, sum, as a conscious being, as a thinking thing. This Descartes established as a self-evident truth that no mind could doubt. But he is now afraid. He is afraid that he is stuck, trapped in the cogito, because the cogito proof establishes only that I exist as a mind with its own thoughts. Philosophically, this is the position that is called solipsism. Solipsism is the view that my mind with its thoughts is the only thing that exists, is the only thing that is real, and that you and the physical world are only ideas within my mind. Solipsism is dangerously close to being a philosophical expression of the form of insanity that is called schizophrenia. One striking feature of the schizophrenic personality is his withdrawal from the common world of reality into his own private, closed-in world in which only his mind and its thoughts have reality. Has the cogito proof of Descartes, that I exist as a thinking thing with my own thoughts, has this become a trap? Is the cogito trapping me in solipsism, the doctrine that my own mind with its own thoughts is all that is real? Is the cogito trapping me also in the schizophrenic's withdrawal into a private, closed-in world, into the schizophrenic's viewpoint of the world as being a cut off and closed-in viewpoint? How can Descartes escape from the strange solitude of solipsism and from the point of view of the withdrawal of the schizophrenic into a closed-in world? He can do this only by proving that something else exists besides his own mind and its thoughts. In that case, if something else does exist, then my mind is not alone as the only reality. But how? With Descartes' demand for absolute mathematical certainty, how can he prove that anything exists except his own mind and its ideas? What he needs is another true proposition, which will show that something else does exist, something else is real, besides my own mind. And so he goes to the cogito, back to the cogito. It at least is an absolutely true proposition. And he thinks, I have just in the cogito discovered an idea to be true. What makes it true and certain? And his answer is, a true proposition is one which is self-evident to anyone's reason and also is clear and distinct. By clear and distinct, he means an idea which is precise in itself and different from any other idea. A proposition which is self-evident and clear and distinct is therefore absolutely certain, and the mind cannot help accept it. This, then, is Descartes' criterion or test of certainty, that an idea, in order to be certain, must be self-evident, clear, and distinct. But he has already run into a problem with this with regard to mathematical propositions. They are accepted by him as self-evident, 2 plus 2 is 4, and clear and distinct. But maybe, he already pointed out, maybe I am deceived in such absolutely certain propositions, certain to my mind. Maybe I am deceived by a malignant or evil demon or God. It would be easy for such an evil demon, for such an evil God, says Descartes, if he wishes it, to cause me to fall into error or to hold false beliefs, even when I believe myself to have the best evidence and absolutely certain propositions. How then can I know that anything else exists besides my own mind? A demon could not deceive me in the cogito, but a demon could deceive me in anything else that I believe. And so Descartes decides, near the beginning of his third meditation, where he says, I must examine whether there is a God as soon as an opportunity occurs. And if I find that there is one, I must also investigate whether he can be a deceiver. For as long as this is unknown, I do not see that I can ever be certain of anything. Descartes therefore must prove that God exists and that God is no deceiver. But is it possible to prove that God exists? Do you believe in God? Do you think that you can prove that your belief is true and certain? The great Catholic theologians of the Middle Ages, such as St. Anselm and St. Thomas, tried to prove that God exists. They tried to prove this by rational and deductive arguments. From self-evident axioms, they attempted to deduce the existence of God. During the Middle Ages, repeated efforts by the schoolmen, the scholastics, used reason to prove that God exists. These proofs are now called the classical rationalistic proofs of the existence of God. And these medieval proofs have been subjected to devastating criticism. But Descartes, who is the first of the modern philosophers, cannot, at this point in his philosophy, use any of their famous proofs of God's existence, because he now knows only that I myself exist as a thinking thing. He cannot therefore argue, as the great St. Thomas argued, from the existence of the world with its infinite series of causes to the existence of God as the first cause. This argument of St. Thomas's is known as the cosmological proof of God's existence, and it claims that since everything in the world has a cause, there must be a first cause in the series of causes. And to this first cause of all other causes, says St. Thomas, everyone gives the name of God. Clearly, Descartes cannot argue that God exists as the necessary first cause of all other causes, because Descartes has not yet proved that there is a world at all, and so he is not entitled even to use the word world in his argument. Similarly, Descartes cannot use another one of St. Thomas's proofs of God's existence, which is the so-called argument from design, which also assumes, like the cosmological argument, that the world exists, and which reasons that the harmony and orderliness and beauty of physical nature, by which humanity is provided with suitable temperature, light, air, food, water, shelter, this benevolent and beautiful order and arrangement could not be accidental, the argument goes, but must have been planned or designed for the well-being and edification of humans by an intelligent being. Therefore, God exists as the necessary designer, the planner and governor of the world. But Descartes cannot argue from how wonderfully planned the order of the world is to serve the needs of humanity, to the existence of God as the master intelligence who designed such a world, because Descartes has not yet proved that the world exists. Nor can he argue from the beauty of the world. Who has not stood on a mountaintop and felt the beauty of the valley below, and at that moment knew that God exists? Descartes cannot use that argument from the beauty of the world to God who provided that beauty, because he does not at this point know that the world exists. How then will he make his move out of the cogito, out of the knowledge, the only knowledge that he has, that I myself exist? How will he move out of that to prove that God exists? He can prove God's existence only by reasoning from the only proposition he has established as absolutely true, that I, Descartes, exist as a thinking thing, as a conscious substance, having ideas. What is an idea? By idea, Descartes means anything one is conscious of. Feelings of joy or pain or empathy, these are ideas. Sense perceptions of the sun or of a tree or of the crowds of people on a city street, these are also ideas. Recollections or memories of one's childhood or of a recent war or of a public scandal, these are ideas. And thoughts of the intellect or reason, such as scientific, philosophic, or mathematical statements, these also are ideas. All of these are ideas. And so once again he looks at his ideas and finds that he can now make three main points about ideas: where they come from, what kind of reality they have, and what they refer to. His first point with regard to where ideas come from is that when we ask what the source of our ideas is, where do they come from, how do we happen to have them, we find that there are three kinds of ideas. There are those ideas which he claims are born with everyone, and which he calls innate, and appear to come from our own nature, and to be known by the light of our own reason, such as the idea of substance or thing. This is innate in everyone, he says. Cause, existence, time, space, the basic principles of mathematics and logic are innate in us all, born with us. Secondly, there are those ideas that appear to be invented by human beings and which he calls factitious, such as ideas of mermaids, unicorns, or utopias, ideas that we make up. And thirdly, there are those ideas which appear to come from outside us and which nature seems to suggest to us and which come to us despite our will. These ideas he calls adventitious. For example, hearing a noise, seeing the sun, trees, or colors. And so Descartes has shown the ways in which ideas differ with respect to their source, with respect to how we come to have them. Innate ideas are those that come from the very nature of human reason itself and are natural to all human beings, like the idea of substance or cause. Factitious ideas come from human imaginative inventiveness, like at the present time ideas of science fiction. And adventitious ideas seem to be caused by things outside us in the world. But now Descartes makes his second point about ideas, that insofar as ideas are simply present in our minds, they exist actually in our minds and have what he calls actual or formal reality. And now Descartes goes on to make his third and last point with regard to ideas. Here Descartes is not concerned with where ideas come from or what kind of reality they have, but with what they are ideas of. What are they about? What objects do they represent? Ideas are always ideas of something. They are ideas of objects. Ideas represent or refer to objects. This feature of ideas Descartes calls their objective reality. The objective reality of ideas consists in their referring to objects, their being about objects, as the idea of God refers to God. The idea of an oak tree refers to an oak tree. The idea of an army refers to an army. Now, all of these ideas, he says, could possibly have been caused by me, be made up by me, be my inventions, that is, be factitious ideas, except for one, the idea of God. And now he gets around to talking about his idea of God. It is a clear and distinct idea, he claims, self-evident. But what is our idea of God? God is an existent substance possessing all positive qualities in their most eminent degree, that is, in the fullest degree of reality, in their perfect form. And again, Descartes says, God is the infinite perfect being. He has in himself any infinite perfection for good that is unlimited by any imperfection. The positive qualities of God, such as goodness, knowledge, power, duration, all such qualities God has to their perfect degree. And so Descartes says, by the name God, I understand a substance which is infinite, independent, all-knowing, all-powerful, and by which I myself and everything else that does exist have been created. Descartes' point will be that we can think this idea of God only because God himself exists and has caused us to have this idea. He is going to argue that what makes it possible for us to have this idea can only be God himself, whose existence causes us to have it. How does Descartes prove this? First of all, he says, we have a clear and distinct idea of God, but all ideas are the effects of causes. Then there must be some cause of our idea of God. Furthermore, he says, we must remember three self-evident propositions about causes. First, there must be as much reality in the cause as in its effect. For pray, he asks, whence can the effect derive its reality if not from its cause? And two, another self-evident proposition we must remember, something cannot come from nothing. And three, what is more perfect cannot proceed from the less perfect. and therefore nothing could cause my idea of God as a perfect substance that is not as perfect as the idea. Although I could be the cause of my idea of physical objects, or animals, or men, since there is nothing so great or perfect in these ideas that I could not have caused them, I could not, however, have caused the idea of God, because I am only a finite, imperfect being, whereas the idea of God is of a perfect and infinite being. So something else, something greater than me, must have caused my idea of God. What caused my idea of God must be something which is at least as great, at least as perfect as the effect, namely my idea of God. Therefore, the cause of my idea of God, since it must be as perfect and as great as the effect, can only be an infinite, perfect being. Namely, the cause of my idea of God can only be God himself. Therefore, God exists as the only possible cause of my idea of him. Having proved that God exists, we can now know, says Descartes, that God cannot be a deceiver, since fraud and deception, he says, have their origin in some defect, whereas God as perfect being has no defects. And finally, Descartes claims that my idea of God is innate in me, native to my mind. God is the cause of this idea in us. God has imprinted it in us as the mark of himself as the workman who has fashioned us. Innate ideas are imprinted in us, such as our knowledge of the idea of substance, of God, the ideas of logic and mathematics, and these ideas are absolutely certain. Moreover, they are not derived by extension from our observations of particular things. There were a great flurry of objections by critics to this proof of God that Descartes presented. The critics argued that an individual person could indeed have caused the idea of this infinite being, since the idea of an infinite being is merely a negative idea, a negation of our finiteness. In defending himself against these critics, Descartes argues that the idea of the infinite is not merely the negation of the finite. Imperfection, finitude in knowledge, or power or goodness requires, says Descartes, a standard of perfection. How would I know that I am imperfect? How would I know that I lack something unless I had within me for comparison and as a standard the idea of a perfect being? Descartes is here identical in his view with Plato in insisting that knowledge of the ideal, the pure form, the standard, is necessary in order to judge the imperfections of the world. Do you agree with the critics of Descartes? Most moderns would disagree with Descartes and say that the idea of God, as he defines it, is not universal and therefore cannot be innate in all human beings. God has not apparently imprinted this idea upon humans in the Oriental world. Buddhism, for example, has no idea of a supernatural God, such as Descartes claims is innate in all human beings. Neither do many African and American Indian tribes have such an idea. The idea is clearly the product, most moderns would say, of being socialized into cultures that are Judeo-Christian and which have this idea, as Descartes, St. Thomas, St. Anselm, St. Augustine, and the scholastics were socialized into the Judeo-Christian religion. Moreover, most moderns would challenge the claim that the concept of perfection is necessary for the concept of imperfection. Instead, they would say perfection, the idea of an infinite being, is simply the product of reasoning, extending and magnifying the qualities of a finite and imperfect being. And finally, moderns would argue against Descartes' rationalistic view of causality, in which, as he says, the effect can be no greater than the cause, the more perfect cannot come from the less perfect, and that something cannot come from nothing. Modern empiricism means by cause only a relationship in space and time, only an invariant relationship between what is prior and what is subsequent. But Descartes offers two other proofs of God as well. He was afraid that his first proof might be too complicated for his readers, as indeed it may have turned out to be. And so we turn to his second proof of the existence of God. I asked, he says, whether I, who have the idea of an infinite and perfect being, can I exist if this being does not exist? Notice that this second proof is, like the first proof, based on the cogito, on my existence as a conscious being having ideas. What then are the possible causes of my existence as a conscious being having ideas? Now remember, his question is whether I, who have the idea of a finite and perfect being, can exist if this infinite and perfect being does not exist. What then are the possible causes of my existence? He enumerates all the possibilities. Myself, my parents, or some other source less perfect than God, and finally, God himself. And Descartes moves along in his argument by a process of elimination. First of all, not myself. I cannot have caused myself to exist, because if I were indeed the author of my own being and independent of everything else, nothing would be lacking to me. I would doubt nothing and desire nothing. I would have everything. So also says the 20th century philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre. He says, to be without lack is what we all desire and can never have. If I could, says Descartes, I would have given myself all perfections, but I lack the power. Therefore, I cannot be the cause of myself. Not my parents or any other cause less perfect than God. My parents have caused me to exist, this is true, but one must then ask who caused them to exist. And one then falls back into an infinite series of causes, going back further and further over the generations. Therefore, God exists as the only possible cause of my existence as a thinking thing. And so we go on then to Descartes' third proof of the existence of God. This is not presented until the fifth meditation. He still there bases his argument on the cogito. But by this time in the fifth meditation, he has already established God's existence and the truth of all my clear and distinct ideas, since God guarantees them as a good God. In the first proof, in the third meditation, Descartes had asked, what is the cause of my idea of a perfect being, namely God? In the second proof, he had asked, what is the cause of my own existence as a conscious being having this idea of God? Here, in the fifth meditation, he focuses upon his idea of God as a clear and distinct idea. And having established that his clear and distinct ideas are true, he sees now that he may use this for a third proof of God. He says, all the properties I clearly and distinctly conceive him to have truly belong to him, just as the properties of a triangle that I clearly and distinctly perceive a triangle to have belong to it. For example, that the sum of its internal angles is 180 degrees. Descartes argues that just as the clear and distinct idea of a triangle includes that the sum of its angles is 180 degrees necessarily, so the clear and distinct idea of a perfect being includes necessarily the perfection of existence. To exist, he argues, belongs to the nature of God as a perfect being. Failure to exist would be an imperfection, but God has no imperfections. Descartes is here offering what is called the ontological proof of God, which argues from our idea of God as a perfect being to the claim that as a perfect being, he must therefore exist. This argument was developed by St. Anselm in the 11th century. In opposition to this ontological argument on Descartes' part, Descartes' polite but hostile critic, the empiricist Pierre Gassendi, who had been sent a copy of the Meditations for his own comments, made this comment, that the idea of God's perfection has nothing whatever to do with the actual existence of such a being. And later Kant and other philosophers claimed with Gassendi the same point against Descartes. And now to mention what many regard as the most serious criticism of Descartes' Meditations. This is commonly called the Cartesian Circle. Cartesian, as you know, is the adjective derived from Descartes' name. We have seen that Descartes' strategy is to use the proof that a perfect, non-deceiving God exists in order to establish that I can go beyond the cogito and that I can trust my clear and distinct self-evident ideas. But is this not a vicious circle? Because in order to prove that God exists, Descartes has had to use the very clear and distinct ideas that God's existence was supposed to guarantee. And so God guarantees my clear and distinct ideas, but my clear and distinct ideas are what guarantee the existence of God. This is the Cartesian Circle. In proving that God exists, Descartes relies on the truth of the clear and distinct ideas that God's existence was supposed to guarantee to be true. Very few scholars believe that Descartes can avoid this vicious circle. In Descartes' own time, his critic Arnaud perceived the Cartesian Circle immediately, and he said, God's existence is guaranteed by the clear and distinct ideas that his existence was supposed to guarantee. Such ideas as that the effect cannot be greater than the cause, the more perfect cannot come from the less perfect, something cannot come from nothing. When we turn to meditation 4, Descartes is finding it necessary to explain to us how it is possible that we fall into error. Since Descartes has proved the existence and the truthfulness of God and the certainty of all my clear and distinct ideas, then how is it possible for us to make errors, to make false judgments? God is not responsible for my errors. Rather, says Descartes, error is the result of the imbalance between my understanding and my will. My understanding enables me to have clear and distinct ideas only about a very limited number of things, but my will ventures boldly into claims about all manner of things. The way to keep from falling into error, says Descartes, is to restrain the will from making judgments about what the understanding does not clearly and distinctly know. Here again we see the prudence of Descartes. So far, Descartes has proven only that he himself exists as a thinking thing, and that God exists, and that my clear and distinct ideas are true. How can he show that the physical world exists? But the physical world is what the exciting new science was all about, the new science of physics and astronomy, for which Galileo had been punished until he died. How can Descartes prove that the physical world exists and that it is sun-centered, as the new science says, without being punished by the Church's Inquisition and dying miserably in prison as Galileo had died?
Pre-recorded in the studios of the Maryland Center